We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we continue to be joined by Scott Cosenza. So, Scott, in the first part here, we were just talking about Kash Patel, Dan Bongino. Let's get your thoughts on what Kash Patel has laid out in terms of what he's going to do over the next 4 years.
Well, the Kash Patel nomination and confirmation is truly remarkable, Mark. The idea that a head of the FBI would have a significant, almost a decade of experience as a public defender is kind of earth-shattering for those of us who've charted the recent, the history of the FBI, which has been so pro-prosecution. It's hard to really quantify. It's 100% prosecution-minded, and the idea that justice includes, a defense that is respected in a way that's not denigrated is really new. It's the kind of thing where, neither Barack Hussein Obama, who was supposed to be a liberal's idea of a good president, or Bill Clinton, none of those, like
William Jefferson Clinton.
Yeah. William Jefferson Blythe Clinton, actually.
There you go.
The hypocrisy knows no bounds, because they made fun of George Herbert Walker Bush for having many names, but William Jefferson Blythe Clinton was so they couldn't even win that. It's just one of those things where, it's fun to remember the hypocrisy, isn't anew with response to the Trump administration.
John Trump.
Just turned up more. Yeah. But it's a real win for liberals. It's a win for limited government. Let's remember the government is in place to protect us from each other, and then limited to protect us from it. The scary part is the government coming after us inappropriately, and that it went after Donald Trump and he prevailed. And we now have people like Tulsi Gabbard, who was the victim survivor of illegal government prosecution and law enforcement action, motivated not with a genuine effort to protect Americans, but, in service of restricting her free speech or punishing her for it. This kind of impetus, and to see Kash Patel, who served, by the way, not in a white shoe kind of upper level white collar criminal defense, but public defender, Miami-Dade County, both state and federal. These are abattoirs of justice, Mark, not high level dealings where the real dirty work that a lot of prosecutors engage in, I'm sure, was revealed to Mr. Patel, which I think just elevates him in terms of when he's looking out for Americans. It's not just prosecution win. It's let's selectively use our resources to get the people who are hurting others. We shouldn't
triaging justice, as it were.
There are so few federal criminal prosecutorial resources that we can direct them all at crimes and people whom we all would agree should be prosecuted, the fraudsters and the violent people. We don't have to go for those maybe cases of, should we use a new interpretation of the law, to go after somebody who also happens to be our political rival? That kind of thing need not happen.
I believe the last I've seen of the FBI was watching White Collar about a decade ago, and there's no Neil Caffrey on the books nowadays. So let's move from, let's stick with Kash Patel, but away from the FBI and to the ATF, or the BATF. I think BATFE. Oh,
if
yeah.
You really want to say it. It's the Bureau
of
of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
The BATFA.
Yeah. The ATF guys, just like they want to be in the cool three-letter CIA, FBI, but they never have been. They've always been far lesser than in terms of their purview and their respect amongst law enforcement and what they've been able to accomplish. But it makes no sense that, for instance, our nation's premier executive protection agency is the Secret Service, which is in the Department of Treasury. And those Treasury agents, you may not know this, but the ones that are on the presidential detail, they actually have caseloads or other executive detail protection details. They actually have caseloads pursuant to like counterfeiting and like random Treasury investigations. It's kind of preposterous to have them. It was just an accident of history. And then, once they have it's in their turf, it's like you could never move it because, there's a lot of people with vested interest in keeping things where they are. And so it would just make sense to reimagine all this, have a federal police force. You could call it any number of things. And federal law enforcement would then be, you could have a gun crime unit and you could have a counterfeiting unit. And maybe because of the unique nature of how Treasury notes are, it's a highly specified, right, to really tell how to make one and counterfeit one. Okay, fine. It would make sense to have some expertise there. But the federal crime force should just be a federal police force, divided amongst people. And Kash Patel, I think, is going to do that. I think the appointment of him to be an interim leader of the ATF is about extinguishing the separate agency, would be my guess.
So presumably because he is director of the FBI, he doesn't need a further appointment to become interim boss over at ATF, right?
There is no crime that an ATF agent can lodge a charge for, bring a charge for a U.S. attorney that an FBI agent cannot do the same thing for. It may not work in the reverse. The ATF, through their rules and regulations, may only be able to bring crimes under certain sections of the federal code that pertain to gun crime, but that's not true for FBI agents. So there's just no reason to
cigarette crime, presumably, and alcohol crime.
Right. Yes. Well, actually, you make a point there. Okay, so that's part of the accident of history as to how this happened. And how it happened is the fiction is so many things that we have going on are based on these fictions. The fiction is that they're after a tax violation.
Sure.
That it is a tax crime, which is how Prohibition, by the way, Treasury agents were the lead officers against alcohol and Prohibition because it was a violation. The federal tax stamp wasn't paid. They tried to enforce marijuana laws in the same way. In fact, in state laws, they did that. Some states where marijuana was illegal passed a state tax requirement that your marijuana had to be accompanied by a tax stamp. And of course, no one ever did it.
That's a brave marijuana grower.
Here's what it allowed them to do. Anytime anybody was found possessing marijuana, they also got an additional state tax crime added onto it, which was, of course, disingenuous and designed only to punish people, not to actually collect a tax. So it's through that accident of history that the ATF is who are Treasury agents, by the way. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives are Treasury agents under the Treasury Department. And that's how they got that purview, because guns were taxed federally. And so you didn't pay a tax stamp on a machine gun. And that's why the ATF became the people who enforce those laws.
So they've managed to really build up a poor reputation over the last 20 years, the ATF. I know, understatement of the year, or the decade, perhaps.
Waco was 94 or 5. It's
90. Oh, that's 30 years. 30 years. So do you think
not that they didn't smear themselves before that?
Of course,
Randy Weaver was before Waco, I think, and a few others.
So do you think that a restructuring would be, I don't know what's the best way to say it, to kind of wipe away the stain that covers the agency and rebuild it anew, or is it just going to be sidelined until government changes hands again?
I think that the ATF so poisoned the well with how they behaved at Waco, and their reputation amongst law-abiding, good people, gun owners, is of a toxic, overbearing body that wishes to not uphold the law, but punish Americans for their interest in the gun culture. So I think extinguishment is the best course ahead for them.
Well, we'll see what happens once Kash Patel really gets his teeth into the matter. Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much for being here.
Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.